What would you do if you discovered that the family living next door to you wasn't what they seemed, that beneath their picture-perfect smiles lay a generational secret so disturbing it had been deliberately erased from local records? In the autumn of 1892, when the wheat fields of Kansas stretched golden beneath an unforgiving sun, a young county clerk named Thomas Whitley made a discovery that would haunt him for the remainder of his days. What began as a routine archival task in the basement of the Ellis County Courthouse would unravel into one of the most disturbing family histories ever documented on American soil. If you appreciate stories that challenge the boundaries of human depravity and familial devotion, you'll want to stay until the very end. The Mercer family estate stood approximately 17 miles outside of Hays, Kansas, a sprawling property of nearly 800 acres acquired through a series of suspiciously fortunate land acquisitions beginning in 1871. Patriarch Abraham Mercer had arrived in Ellis County claiming to be a widower from Pennsylvania, accompanied by two identical twin boys, both with striking pale blue eyes and hair so blonde it appeared almost white in the summer sun. The twins, introduced as Isaiah and Elijah, were said to be 7 years old upon their arrival, though no birth records were ever filed with local authorities. "The first time I saw those children, I knew something wasn't right," recalled Josephine Blackwood, who served as a midwife in Ellis County for nearly 40 years. Her statement, preserved in the County Historical Society's oral history collection, continues, "Those boys moved in perfect synchronization, like mirror images of each other. Never once did I see them disagree or even speak to one another in public. Mr. Mercer kept them close, barely letting them interact with other children. But it was their eyes that troubled me most. Vacant, yet somehow watchful, like they were waiting for something none of us could see." Within 5 years of establishing his homestead, Abraham Mercer had become one of the wealthiest landowners in the region. His agricultural ventures proved uncommonly successful, despite devastating droughts that ruined neighboring farms. More puzzling still was his apparent immunity to the grasshopper plagues of 1874 that decimated crops throughout Kansas. While his neighbors abandoned their farms in financial ruin, Mercer's wheat fields remained mysteriously untouched. County records indicate that in 1878, Abraham Mercer made a journey east, returning 3 months later with 2 young girls, introduced as his nieces, Sarah and Rebecca Miller, supposedly the orphaned daughters of his late sister. Like the twins, the girls were identical in appearance, with the same corn silk hair and unsettling pale eyes. The girls were estimated to be 4 years old upon their arrival in Kansas. What particularly disturbed Thomas Whitley as he pieced together fragmented records nearly 14 years later was the complete absence of documentation regarding these children. No birth certificates, no death records for their supposed parents, no trace of their existence prior to their appearance in Ellis County. The only official document Whitley discovered was a crudely amended deed to the Mercer property, listing all 4 children as equal inheritors upon Abraham's death. "I remember when those little girls arrived," said Eleanor Simmons, a neighboring farmer's wife, in a sworn statement dated October 3rd, 1892. "They didn't act like normal children, never played, never laughed. Mercer kept them separated from the boys until they were about 8 years old. Then suddenly they were all raised together, but like it was some kind of experiment. He'd make them sit across from each other at meal times, one boy facing one girl, and they weren't allowed to speak, just stare at each other for hours. My husband said we should mind our own business, but I knew it wasn't natural. No child should be raised that way." As the children matured, the unusual nature of the Mercer household became increasingly apparent to the community. The twins were educated at home by Abraham himself, while the girls received no formal education whatsoever. Several times a year, Abraham would take one twin and one girl on extended trips, leaving the remaining pair behind to tend the farm. Neighbors reported that the children were never permitted to engage with the community independently, always appearing in public under Abraham's watchful eye. Sheriff's records from 1884 document a concerning incident when Isaiah and Elijah, then 20 years old, physically assaulted a young man from town who had attempted to speak with Rebecca at a county fair. The case was mysteriously dismissed after Abraham Mercer had a private meeting with Judge William Harrington, a meeting after which the judge reportedly doubled his personal land holdings within 6 months. The first truly alarming discovery came to light in 1888, when a traveling photographer visited the region. Abraham commissioned family portraits, an unusual extravagance for the otherwise frugal farmer. These photographs, preserved in the Ellis County Historical Society archives, reveal an unnerving tableau. Abraham seated center, flanked by the now adult twins, with the girls positioned directly behind their corresponding twin. More disturbing is the positioning of hands, each twin's right hand resting possessively on the shoulder of one girl, while Abraham's hands are placed palm down on his knees, revealing unusual scarring across all 10 fingertips. Those photographs gave me nightmares for weeks after developing them, wrote Horace Jenkins, the photographer, in correspondence with his brother in Topeka. The letter, discovered among Jenkins' personal effects after his unexplained disappearance in 1890, continues, "Something unnatural exists in that household. The girls never spoke a single word during the entire session. The boys answered, for them often in unison, as if sharing a single mind. But it was the old man who truly unsettled me. He inspected each photograph with such intensity, rejecting several because, as he put it, the symmetry is not yet perfect. I pray I never have reason to return to that property." In the winter of 1891, Abraham Mercer fell ill with what appeared to be influenza. Dr. James Calloway was summoned to the farm, but was permitted to examine Abraham only in the presence of all 4 young adults. According to Dr. Calloway's medical log, the twins spoke in alternating sentences, completing each other's thoughts, while the girls remained silent, each standing behind one twin, mirroring their positions precisely. "I advised hospitalization," Dr. Calloway later testified, "but my recommendation was refused immediately, not by Abraham, who seemed willing, but by the twins. They spoke with an authority that suggested they, not their father, controlled the household. When I attempted to speak directly to the young women, asking about their health and whether they had symptoms similar to Abraham's, the twins intercepted each question and answered as if the inquiry had been directed at them. I left with the distinct impression that those girls were not permitted to speak to outsiders under any circumstances." Abraham Mercer died on January 17, 1892. No funeral was held. The death certificate, signed by Dr. Calloway, listed natural causes, though the doctor later confided to colleagues that he had been pressured to complete the document without performing a proper examination of the body. Most disturbing was Dr. Calloway's observation that when he arrived at the farm, Abraham's body had already been prepared for burial, dressed in formal attire with his hands curiously bound together with white silk ribbon. What troubled me most, Dr. Calloway wrote in his private journal, discovered after his suicide in early 1893, was not the state of the deceased, but the behavior of those 4 young people. They showed no grief, no emotional response whatsoever. They stood in perfect formation around the body, each twin with his corresponding female counterpart, and recited what sounded like a memorized speech about their father's virtues. When I mentioned the unusual binding of the hands, Elijah, or perhaps it was Isaiah, I could never tell them apart, informed me it was a family tradition to keep the secrets within. I signed the death certificate because I feared for my safety if I refused. Following Abraham's death, the community expected the household to dissolve, perhaps with marriages announced between the unrelated young adults who had been raised together. Instead, the property records show that exactly 1 month after Abraham's passing, 2 marriage licenses were filed with the county clerk. Isaiah Mercer wed Sarah Miller, while Elijah Mercer wed Rebecca Miller. Both ceremonies were conducted privately on the Mercer property, with the only witness listed as Frederick Palmer, a traveling minister with no known church affiliation. What drew Thomas Whitley's attention to these marriages nearly 7 months later was a discrepancy he discovered while reorganizing the county's birth records. In processing documentation for a child born to Rebecca Mercer in August 1892, Whitley noticed an irregularity in the marriage license. The document had been filed correctly, but contained an unusual notation in the margins. Confirmed suitable pairing as directed by AM. The reflection remains unbroken. Curious about this cryptic note, Whitley began investigating the background of the Miller girls. His inquiries to authorities in Pennsylvania yielded no record of their birth or of any Miller family connected to Abraham Mercer. More troubling still, when Whitley requested information about Abraham's own history, he discovered that no Abraham Mercer had emigrated from Pennsylvania to Kansas in the time period claimed. "I believe I have uncovered something deeply unsettling," Whitley wrote in a personal letter to his supervisor, County Judge Henry Maxwell, dated September 12, 1892. "The Mercer family appears to be built entirely on falsified documents and misrepresentation. There exists no record of Abraham Mercer prior to his arrival in Kansas, nor any documentation confirming the identities of the children he brought with him. I have reason to suspect that Sarah and Rebecca Miller are not, in fact, his nieces at all, but may share a much closer blood relation to the family. I request permission to expand this investigation with the assistance of state authorities." Judge Maxwell's response, written the following day, was brief and unequivocal. "You are to cease this line of inquiry immediately. The Mercer family has been a pillar of our agricultural community for over 20 years. These administrative discrepancies you've uncovered are undoubtedly clerical errors or simplifications made to accommodate a grieving family during their original settlement. I have personally known Abraham Mercer and can vouch for his character. This matter is closed." Undeterred, Whitley continued his investigation in secret. His personal journal, later recovered from a locked compartment in his desk, details his growing obsession with uncovering the truth about the Mercer family. He began interviewing former farmhands who had briefly worked on the Mercer property, piecing together disturbing accounts of life within the household. Jeremiah Foster, who worked the harvest of 1887, provided the following account. "I only lasted 3 weeks there. The way those people lived wasn't natural. The house was split down the middle, east wing and west wing, with each twin and his girl living on opposite sides, like mirror images of each other. Same furniture arranged exactly the same way, just reversed. They do everything in unison but opposite. If one twin was eating with his right hand, the other would be eating with his left. The girls weren't treated like wives or even like women. They were treated like extensions of the twins themselves. I quit after I saw what was in the cellar. Old man Mercer had a room down there with 2 chairs facing each other and straps on the arms. There was dried blood on the floor beneath them. When I asked about it, Isaiah told me it was where they maintained the harmony. I left that night and never went back." Another farmhand, William Cooper, reported even more disturbing observations. "The worst thing was the way those girls moved. They'd mirror each other perfectly across the house. If Sarah was pouring tea in the east wing, Rebecca would be doing exactly the same in the west wing at exactly the same moment. But most unnatural of all was what I glimpsed through a window one night. One of the twins, Isaiah, I think, was standing before a full-length mirror with Sarah beside him. On the other side of the house, visible through another window, the other twin stood before an identical mirror with Rebecca. They were all naked, contorting their bodies into strange positions while the old man walked between the two rooms, adjusting their stances. They held each pose for exactly 7 breaths, I counted, before shifting to another. I know what I saw wasn't any Christian ritual. As Whitley delved deeper into his unauthorized investigation, he began to uncover evidence suggesting a pattern of similar arrangements preceding the Mercers' arrival in Kansas. In county records from Center County, Pennsylvania, he discovered references to a family named Mercer who had departed abruptly in 1870 following accusations of unnatural practices and suspicious disappearances of local children. The description of the family patriarch matched Abraham, though the name listed was Ambrose rather than Abraham. Further correspondence with authorities in Pennsylvania revealed an even more alarming detail. Prior to their sudden departure, the Mercers had been under investigation for the disappearance of twin girls from a neighboring farm, the 4-year-old daughters of a widow, who had herself vanished shortly after reporting her children missing. On September 27, 1892, Whitley took the extraordinary step of traveling to the Mercer farm himself, ostensibly to deliver property tax documents that required signatures. His journal entry from that day provides a first-hand account of the increasingly bizarre household. The property appears even more isolated than I had imagined, situated behind a dense windbreak of trees planted in perfectly straight rows. The main house is larger than reported, with 2 wings extending from a central structure in perfect symmetry. I was met at the entrance by both twins simultaneously, each emerging from his respective wing. They moved in perfect coordination, dressed identically, but with their clothing reversed. Isaiah's buttons on the right, Elijah's on the left. They invited me inside, leading me to a central room dominated by an unusual circular table with seats positioned at 4 equidistant points. The room contained no other furniture, only 4 identical mirrors hung on each wall. I presented the tax documents, explaining that all 4 property owners needed to sign. Only then did the young women appear, each entering through a different doorway at precisely the same moment. I was struck immediately by their appearance. Though clearly adults, they were dressed identically in white dresses, more appropriate for children, with their hair arranged in matching braids. More disturbing was their physical condition. Both appeared gaunt, with dark circles beneath their eyes and an unhealthy pallor. Neither spoke nor made eye contact with me. When I directly addressed Sarah, asking how she was adjusting to married life, she did not respond. Instead, Isaiah answered, "We are well satisfied with our arrangements." The family continues as it should. As they signed the documents, I observed that all 4 used their non-dominant hands, the twins signing with their left hands, the girls with their right. Their signatures were nearly identical, merely mirror images of each other. More concerning still, I noticed similar scarring on all their fingertips, resembling the marks described on Abraham's hands in earlier accounts. Before departing, I requested use of their washroom, hoping to glimpse more of the household. Isaiah directed me down a hallway lined with closed doors. At the end, I discovered not a washroom, but a nursery, a room divided precisely down the middle with 2 identical cribs, 1 on each side. Though I saw no infants, both cribs appeared to be in use. When I commented on the nursery, suggesting it was fortunate that both couples had been blessed with children simultaneously, Elijah corrected me. Not 2 children. 1 child perfectly reflected. The continuation is proceeding as Father designed. I left shortly thereafter, unable to shake the feeling that all 4 of them watched me from the windows as I departed, their faces arranged in the same expressionless mask, multiplied 4-fold. 2 days after his visit to the Mercer farm, Whitley approached Sheriff Benjamin Crawford with his findings, presenting the evidence he had accumulated suggesting decades of deception, possible kidnapping, and what he termed unnatural practices involving blood relations. Sheriff Crawford, initially skeptical, agreed to accompany Whitley to the farm the following morning to conduct a formal inquiry. They never arrived. According to the sheriff's official report, dated October 1st, 1892, he and Whitley were approximately 3 miles from the Mercer property when their horses became inexplicably spooked. Whitley's horse threw him, and he struck his head on a rock, dying instantly. Sheriff Crawford returned to town with Whitley's body, ruling the death accidental. This version of events might have remained unchallenged had Dr. Calloway not performed the autopsy. His findings, documented in a report that was subsequently removed from county records but preserved in his personal papers, indicated that Whitley's fatal injury was inconsistent with a fall from horseback. The wound that killed him appeared to have been made by a sharp, narrow instrument driven with considerable force into the base of his skull. Dr. Calloway brought his concerns to Judge Maxwell, who dismissed them and ordered Whitley buried immediately. The following day, Judge Maxwell announced his retirement due to health concerns and relocated to Colorado within the week. Sheriff Crawford, when questioned about the discrepancies in his report by the incoming judge, maintained that Whitley's death had been a tragic accident and suggested that Dr. Calloway's judgment was compromised by his known dependence on laudanum. With the only official investigation derailed, the Mercer family might have continued undisturbed had it not been for an unexpected development. On October 12, 1892, a young woman arrived in Hays claiming to be Amanda Wilson, the sister of Abraham Mercer's deceased wife. She requested directions to the Mercer farm, stating she wished to visit her nieces and nephews. Her arrival caused considerable confusion, as Abraham had always claimed to be a widower with no living relations except for his purported nieces. Before local authorities could question her further, Amanda Wilson disappeared from her hotel room, leaving behind only a journal in which she had documented her 20-year search for her missing sister and infant twins. The journal contained a devastating account. In 1871, Amanda's sister Caroline had given birth to identical twin daughters in a small town outside Philadelphia. 2 weeks later, Caroline's husband Henry Wilson, described as an intensely private man with an interest in mirror, symmetry and spiritual reflection, had brought home identical twin boys he claimed to have, adopted after their mother died in childbirth. According to Amanda's writings, her sister had become increasingly fearful of her husband in the months that followed, confiding that he was conducting experiments with the children, forcing the infant twins to mirror each other's movements for hours at a time. Caroline described ritualistic bloodletting involving all 4 children, with their fingertips cut and pressed together to merge their essences across the mirror plane, as her husband explained it. Amanda's final entry, dated October 11, 1892, expressed her determination to confront the man she believed had murdered her sister and kidnapped her nieces. "Tomorrow I will face Henry, or Abraham, as he now calls himself, and demand to know what he has done with my sister's body and why he has committed this monstrous fraud. If Caroline is indeed dead, as I have long feared, I will rescue her daughters from whatever unholy arrangement they have been forced into. The authorities may have been blind to his deceptions, but I know the truth. The reflection will be shattered." Sheriff Crawford, facing mounting pressure from state officials who had been contacted by Amanda Wilson prior to her journey to Kansas, finally organized a search party. On October 15th, 5 men approached the Mercer property only to find it completely abandoned. The house stood empty, with furniture still in place but no sign of its occupants. In the cellar, they discovered the mirrored chairs described by former farmhands, with leather straps now removed but stains still visible on the floor beneath them. Most disturbing was the discovery made in the attic, a hidden room accessed through a concealed panel containing hundreds of journals written in Abraham Mercer's hand. These documents, now preserved in the Kansas State Historical Society's restricted collection, detail over 20 years of what Abraham termed the reflection experiment, an attempt to create perfect symmetry between twins through controlled breeding and ritualistic conditioning. The earliest journals confirm Amanda Wilson's account, Abraham was indeed born Henry Wilson, and had orchestrated the disappearance of his wife after she threatened to expose his plans. The twin boys were not adopted, but were instead his biological sons from a previous relationship that he had kept secret from Caroline. His ultimate goal, expressed repeatedly throughout the journals, was to create what he called the perfect reflection. Children born of twin parents who were themselves raised as mirror images of each other. The conventional family is an asymmetrical abomination, he wrote in 1879. True harmony can only be achieved when life itself is perfectly balanced across the mirror plane. Isaiah and Elijah progress well in their conditioning, though Elijah required additional correction to eliminate his tendency toward right-hand dominance. The girls remain more challenging. Their natural bond as twins resists the separation necessary to pair them properly with their future husbands. More aggressive measures may be required. Later entries document increasingly disturbing conditioning sessions in the cellar, where the children were subjected to systematic mirroring exercises, often involving physical punishment when they failed to maintain perfect symmetry. Abraham's journals reveal that he viewed the twins not as separate individuals, but as fragmented halves of idealized whole beings, the boys representing one complete entity, the girls another. Most horrifying were the entries from 1891, when Abraham, sensing his impending death, accelerated his plans. The final phase must be initiated before I pass from this plane. The marriages will complete the first reflection. The births that follow will establish the second. By the third generation, if my calculations are correct, the bloodlines will achieve perfect symmetry. What began as 4 separate beings will culminate in twin children, who are perfect mirror images of each other down to the level of their very souls. His final journal entry, dated January 16, 1892, one day before his reported death, suggests an even more sinister development. I have selected my successor to oversee the continuation of the work. Isaiah has demonstrated the greater commitment to our purpose and will inherit my knowledge. Tonight we complete the transition ritual. My physical form may perish, but my guidance will remain within him. The reflection must never be broken. State authorities launched a nationwide search for the missing family, but no trace was ever found. Property records indicate the land was sold through a series of intermediaries to an investment company based in California. The proceeds were transferred to a bank account in Colorado that was emptied within 24 hours of being opened. The case was officially closed in 1895, listed as an unsolved disappearance. For nearly 80 years, the Mercer case remained largely forgotten until 1976, when historian Margaret Sullivan began researching unusual family structures in 19th-century frontier communities. Her investigation led her to the sealed records in the Kansas State Archives, where she discovered an unsettling postscript to the original case. In 1932, a farm family in eastern Colorado reported a strange encounter with new neighbors who had purchased adjacent land. The neighbors, 2 identical twin men and their wives, also identical twins, kept to themselves but were observed engaging in synchronized activities across their property. Most disturbing was the report that all 4 had identical scarring on their fingertips and insisted on being called by only their first initials. When local authorities, alerted by the uneasy neighbors, investigated the property, they found it suddenly abandoned. Left behind was a single journal page containing an entry dated October 1st, 1932. The reflections multiply with each generation. What began with 4 now numbers 16. The symmetry approaches perfection. The great work continues. The investigation into this potential reappearance of the Mercer family was abandoned during the Dust Bowl crisis, as authorities focused on more pressing concerns than a family of recluses who had moved on. However, Sullivan's research uncovered similar reports from Wyoming in 1954, Oregon in 1967, and most recently, Vermont in 1975, each describing identical family units with mirrored living arrangements who disappeared whenever official attention turned their way. Most chilling was Sullivan's discovery of birth records from a small hospital in Vermont, documenting the birth of identical quadruplets, 2 boys and 2 girls, to parents whose names matched those from the Colorado report 43 years earlier. The attending physician noted an unusual request from the parents, that the infants be arranged in the nursery in proper alignment, with mirrors between each pair. Sullivan's research was abruptly abandoned when she suffered an unexpected mental breakdown in 1977. She was institutionalized after becoming convinced that her own reflection was watching her through mirrors, waiting to pull her across the plane. Her notebooks were sealed by her family, and the investigation once again went cold. In 2008, during the renovation of an abandoned farmhouse outside Burlington, Vermont, construction workers discovered a hidden room beneath the main floor. Inside were 4 identical journals, each apparently written by a different member of the same family, though the handwriting in all 4 was nearly identical, merely mirrored from left to right. The journals documented what appeared to be the daily activities of an extended family group, with strict rules about maintaining reflective harmony. The most recent entry, dated April 17, 2008, just 3 months before the discovery, read, "The original 4 have multiplied to 64 across 4 properties. The Eastern Branch reports successful alignment of the newest generation. The Western Branch has eliminated an asymmetrical birth, restoring the balance. The Northern Branch prepares for the final reflection, when the barrier between mirror planes will dissolve. The Southern Branch maintains the archives and continues the search for descendants of the betrayer. Her bloodline must be extinguished before the great convergence can occur. We have traced her to Illinois. The correction team departs tomorrow. The great work continues. Local authorities forwarded the journals to the FBI, but no further evidence has ever been made public. Requests for information under the Freedom of Information Act have been consistently denied, citing ongoing investigation. In 2023, an anonymous post appeared briefly on an internet forum dedicated to unsolved historical mysteries. The post included a photograph of 4 identical children, 2 boys and 2 girls with pale blonde hair and light blue eyes, seated in a symmetrical arrangement around a circular table. Their fingertips appeared to be freshly bandaged. The caption read simply, "The 8th generation approaches completion. The reflections now number 128. When we reach 256, the mirror will shatter, and what lies on the other side will emerge. Those with Mercer blood will survive the convergence. All others will be consumed by the asymmetry of their own existence. The betrayer's line has been located. Correction proceeds as planned. The great work continues. The post was deleted within hours, but not before it was archived by several users. Attempts to trace the origin of the post have been unsuccessful. The IP address leads to an abandoned property in Kansas, the exact location where the original Mercer farm once stood. Local residents report that the property remains empty, though lights are occasionally seen in the distance after midnight. Some claim to have observed 4 identical figures moving in perfect synchronization among the ruins of the old foundation. Others insist they've heard children's voices counting in unison, though no words can be distinguished, only the rhythmic cadence of numbers increasing steadily, as if measuring the time until some appointed hour. County records show that the property was purchased 6 months ago by a private trust with a name that has unsettled those familiar with the original case. The Reflection Continuance. Established 1892. The listed trustees are 2 sets of identical twins, all sharing the middle initial M. The case remains officially unsolved. Local law enforcement considers the recent developments to be elaborate hoaxes perpetrated by individuals familiar with the historical case. The property is now posted with no trespassing signs, though no efforts have been made to secure it against intruders. For those inclined to investigate further, a word of caution: Multiple amateur investigators who have visited the site report experiencing the same disturbing phenomenon upon returning home. Their reflections, they claim, sometimes move a fraction of a second too late, watching them with expressions that don't quite match their own. The truest horror may not be what happened to the Mercer family in 1892, but that their great work continues today, propagating across generations, growing ever larger, approaching some terrible threshold of completion. The reflection endures, and with each new birth, the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond the mirror grows thinner. If you happen to encounter identical twins with pale blue eyes and scarred fingertips, do not engage them in conversation. Above all, do not allow them to learn your name or where you live. The correction teams are always seeking new subjects to restore the symmetry that Amanda Wilson once tried to break. And perhaps, before you dismiss this account as mere sensationalism, take a moment to study your own reflection. Does it move precisely when you do? Or is there the slightest delay, a hesitation that suggests something else might be looking back at you, waiting for its chance to step through? Have you ever considered that the person in your mirror might not be your reflection at all, but rather something else entirely, something that has been waiting patiently, learning your movements, perfecting its mimicry until the day it can take your place? In the spring of 1977, when the rolling plains of western Nebraska shimmered under unseasonable heat, doctoral candidate Elizabeth Harmon stumbled upon a connection that would nearly cost her her life. What began as academic research into rural family structures would eventually expose a century-long conspiracy of blood, mirrors, and perfect symmetry that stretched across 12 states and 4 generations. The discovery she made in a dusty courthouse basement would reveal that the Mercer case of 1892 was merely the visible portion of a much deeper and more insidious design. If you've ever felt watched by your own reflection, you might want to reconsider whether you're truly alone when you stand before a mirror. Elizabeth Harmon had never intended to follow Margaret Sullivan's research. As a sociology doctoral candidate at the University of Chicago, Harmon's dissertation focused on atypical family structures in rural American communities between 1850 and 1950. Sullivan's work on the Mercer case had been largely dismissed by academic circles as sensationalized pseudo-history following the researcher's mental breakdown in 1977. It wasn't until Harmon discovered Sullivan's original field notes, preserved in the university archives, that she began to suspect there might be substance behind the apparent paranoia. Sullivan wasn't crazy, Harmon wrote in her research journal on April 7, 1977. Her notes before the breakdown are meticulous, her methodology sound. Something happened during her research in Vermont that fundamentally changed her. The final entries before her hospitalization show a clear progression from academic curiosity to mounting concern, then to fear, and finally to absolute terror. What's most striking is that she continued to document everything with academic precision, even as she became convinced she was being watched through mirrors. Whatever drove Sullivan to breakdown, it wasn't a pre-existing mental condition. It was something she found. Intrigued by Sullivan's unfinished work, Harmon began tracing the geographical pattern of sightings Sullivan had documented, the mysterious family units of identical twins appearing and disappearing across the country over 8 decades. When mapped chronologically, these appearances formed a distinct spiral pattern, beginning in Kansas and moving outward, with each new location approximately 400 miles from the previous one. Harmon's first breakthrough came when she identified a common element in each location. All were rural communities, situated near natural cave systems or abandoned mine shafts. This detail had been overlooked in previous investigations. More intriguing still, each location had experienced an unusual number of missing persons cases in the years immediately preceding the arrival of the twin families. "I believe Sullivan was onto something significant," Harmon noted after 3 weeks of intensive research. "These aren't random relocations. They're following a specific pattern tied to both geography and population demographics. In each location, the family unit appears approximately 2 years after a cluster of disappearances involving children between the ages of 3 and 7. Specifically, the pattern shows a preference for locations where twins have gone missing. I've identified 17 such cases between 1900 and 1975 that correlate directly with subsequent appearances of the Mercer descendants, or as Sullivan called them. Harmon's research took her to Grand Island, Nebraska, where Sullivan had documented one of the family units residing briefly in 1947 before their sudden disappearance. Local records confirmed that a family matching the description, 2 identical twin men married to identical twin women, had purchased adjoining properties outside town. More disturbing was Harmon's discovery that in the 2 years prior to their arrival, 3 sets of twins had been reported missing from communities within a 100-mile radius. The local historical society maintains surprisingly detailed records, Harmon wrote. The family introduced themselves as the Matthews, James and John Matthews, married to Mary and Martha Matthews. They kept largely to themselves, but made occasional appearances in town, always all 4 together. Several people noted the unusual way they moved in tandem, with one couple seeming to mirror the actions of the other. They remained for approximately 18 months before departing suddenly, leaving most of their possessions behind. The property was purchased through a trust called Reflective Holdings, which I've now found mentioned in property records, from 4 other locations matching Sullivan's timeline. What particularly interested Harmon was a sealed police report she managed to access with the help of a sympathetic county clerk. In 1946, a local farmer reported a disturbing encounter with the Matthews family. He had been invited to their property to discuss purchasing livestock and described being served tea in a strange central room with mirrors on all walls. According to his statement, he became disoriented when he noticed that the reflections in the mirrors didn't always match the movements of the people in the room. When he mentioned this discrepancy, all 4 family members stopped speaking mid-sentence and stared at him with identical expressions that weren't quite right. He left immediately and never returned. The report included a follow-up note indicating that when police visited the property the next day to investigate, they found nothing unusual except for the central room, which did indeed have mirrors on all walls but otherwise appeared normal. The case was dismissed, and the officer wrote that the farmer had likely consumed alcohol prior to his visit and experienced confusion as a result. Harmon's investigation took an unexpected turn when she discovered that the farmer, Harold Jenkins, had disappeared 3 weeks after filing his report. His truck was found abandoned near a cave system 10 miles from the Matthews property. The missing persons case remained unsolved, with local authorities speculating that Jenkins had left town to avoid creditors after his farm fell into financial trouble. "I don't believe Jenkins left voluntarily," Harmon noted. "His bank records, which I've been able to examine, show no financial difficulties. Furthermore, his daughter, now in her 40s, insists that he was excited about expanding his farm and had made detailed plans for the following season." Most telling is the statement from Jenkins' wife that in the days before his disappearance, he had become convinced someone was watching him through mirrors and had covered all reflective surfaces in their home. Pursuing this connection, Harmon contacted Jenkins' daughter, Rebecca Stafford, who agreed to meet at her home in Lincoln, Nebraska. The interview, recorded with Stafford's permission, revealed disturbing new details about the Matthews family and their possible connection to Jenkins' disappearance. "My father wasn't a superstitious man," Stafford stated in the recorded interview. "He was practical, level-headed. But after visiting that farm, he changed. He told us that the people there weren't right, that they moved like marionettes being controlled by something else. The thing that frightened him most was what he saw in the mirrors. He said, when the family thought he wasn't looking, their reflections were performing actions different from what their actual bodies were doing. Like the reflections were practicing for something. Most alarming was Stafford's revelation that after her father's disappearance, she and her mother had received a strange package. Inside was a small hand mirror wrapped in butcher paper with a note that read simply, "He serves the reflection now." When they reported this to local police, the package mysteriously vanished from the evidence room, and the report was later amended to remove any mention of it. After that, we started noticing strange things, Stafford continued. People who looked like my father watching our house from a distance. They resembled him in build and features, but their movements were wrong, jerky and synchronized, like they were learning how to be human. Mom became convinced they'd somehow taken my father, but not killed him. She said they'd put him on the other side. I didn't understand what she meant until years later, when I found her journals after she died. Stafford provided Harmon with 3 journals kept by her mother, Eleanor Jenkins, in the years following her husband's disappearance. The entries documented Eleanor's growing conviction that the Matthews family had somehow captured her husband's essence in a mirror, and were using it to create duplicates of him, imperfect, copies that they were gradually refining. More disturbing were Eleanor's descriptions of seeing these copies through mirrors in her own home, watching her, but retreating when directly observed. "They can only cross through when we're not watching," Eleanor wrote in an entry dated October 19th, 1949. "They need mirrors as gateways, but the passage only opens when the reflection is unobserved. That's why Harold always appears in my peripheral vision, standing behind me in mirrors, but vanishes when I turn to look directly. They're waiting for the moment I stop paying attention. Last night I saw 5 Harolds in my bathroom mirror, all slightly different, all performing the same action with tiny variations, like they were practicing. When I blinked, they were gone. Eleanor Jenkins died in 1973 from what was officially ruled a self-inflicted wound. According to the police report, she was found in her bathroom, surrounded by broken mirror shards, having apparently smashed every reflective surface in her home before cutting her own throat. The report noted the unusual nature of the wound. A perfectly straight incision made with surgical precision, atypical of most suicides. More bizarre was the investigating officer's observation that despite the significant blood loss, no blood was found on any of the mirror fragments. "I don't believe my mother killed herself," Stafford told Harmon. She was terrified of mirrors, yes, but she was also careful. In her final journal, she wrote that she had devised a way to break the connection and free my father. The last entry, written the morning of her death, reads, "I know how to bring him back now. The reflection can be shattered if the original is destroyed at the moment of crossing. Harold will be free, even if I must sacrifice myself. They won't expect me to attack from this side of the glass." This interview convinced Harmon that Sullivan's research, far from being delusional, had uncovered a phenomenon that defied conventional explanation. Following the geographical pattern established in her earlier research, Harmon identified the likely location of the next reflection family, a small community in eastern Wyoming, where 2 sets of twins had been reported missing in the previous 18 months. Before departing for Wyoming, Harmon made one final visit to the Nebraska State Historical Society to examine their records on the Matthews family. There, she discovered a school photograph from 1947 showing 4 children identified as the Matthews children, 2 boys and 2 girls, all appearing to be around 6 years old, all with the same pale blonde hair and light blue eyes, characteristic of the original Mercer family. The existence of these children wasn't mentioned in any previous reports, Harmon noted. More disturbing is their appearance. They're clearly 2 sets of identical twins, yet the school records list them as cousins, not siblings. The photograph itself is unsettling. The children are arranged in a perfect square formation, each positioned exactly the same distance from the others. While the other children in the class photo are smiling naturally, these four wear identical blank expressions. Most notable are their hands. Each child has their hands folded precisely the same way, with bandages visible on all fingertips. The school records included a teacher's note expressing concern about the Matthews children's unusual behavior. The E. Matthews cousins refuse to be separated and become highly distressed if placed in different reading groups. They move in coordinated patterns and often speak in unison or complete each other's sentences. Most concerning is their mirror writing. Regardless of which hand they use, all four produce writing that is perfectly symmetrical to each other, as if their papers were reflections. When asked about this behavior, James Matthews explained that the children are being raised in the traditional family manner and requested that we not interfere with their synchronized development. Armed with this new information, Harmon traveled to Casper, Wyoming in early May 1977. County records confirmed her suspicion. A family trust called Reflection Continuance had purchased property outside town approximately 6 months earlier. The property, like previous locations, was situated near an extensive cave system, locally known as Mirror Caverns, due to the unusual reflective mineral deposits found within. Harmon's journal entry from May 7, 1977, reveals her growing apprehension. I've rented a room in town and begun making inquiries about the new property owners. Local reaction is mixed. Some describe them as private but polite, while others express unease about their synchronized movements and tendency to speak in unison. The family has introduced themselves as the Millers, Samuel and Simon Miller, married to Susan and Sharon Miller. They've enrolled 4 children in the local school, 2 sets of identical twins, around 8 years old. The pattern continues unbroken. Rather than approaching the family directly, Harmon decided to observe them from a distance. She documented their public appearances over the course of a week, noting the rigid formation they maintained, one adult male and female pair always walking several paces ahead of the other, with the children arranged in similar mirrored pairs. More concerning were their interactions with townspeople, which Harmon described as practiced but not quite natural, as if they're performing humanity rather than experiencing it. On May 12th, Harmon observed something that confirmed her worst suspicions. While watching the family from her parked car outside the local grocery store, she saw one of the Miller women drop a can of food. Instead of bending to retrieve it immediately, the woman froze for exactly 3 seconds, as did her mirror counterpart several feet away. Then, with perfect synchronization, both women bent to reach toward the ground, despite the fact that only one had actually dropped something. The children similarly all froze and then moved in unison, though only one was near the dropped item.